is Neil Armstrong, Chapter 3. The Wider World. When Neil started college, he just turned 17. For the first time, he was living away from his family. He got decent grades, as he had in high school. He wasn't focused on his studies, and the science classes were hard. He described his freshman year as a kind of whirl. After 2 years at Purdue came 3 years in the Navy. This was when Neil Armstrong became an airman. He was stationed in Pensacola, Florida, where he learned to fly small, single-engine fighter planes. Chuck Yeager, Charles Chuck Yeager also loved flying. During World War II, he was a daring pilot who shot down enemy planes. After the end of the war in 1945, he worked testing experimental planes. Scientists and engineers wanted to design a plane that could go faster than the speed of sound. That's about 761 miles an hour. By the late 1940s, a new plane called the Bell XI had been developed. Yeager was chosen to pilot on his first flight. Even a horseback riding accident 2 nights before the flight didn't stop him. Fearing that a doctor would tell his boss that he wasn't fit to fly, Yeager went down to a vet who bandaged up his broken ribs. Only a month after Neil Armstrong started college, Chuck Yeager got into the cockpit of the XI and broke the sound barrier. During a 14-minute flight, there isn't actually a real barrier to break, but the term is still used. In other words, he went very, very fast. At Pensacola, the training began with 20 short flights called hops. The instructor sat up front. Neil sat behind and had to pilot the plane, even though it was harder to see from the back. Neil was graded on every hop. After that, Neil went on a fly solo. He also took courses in aeronautics and engineering, as he had at Purdue. He graduated and earned his wings pin from flight training school in August of 1950. He was a licensed Navy aviator, and he was only 20 years old. He still had 2 years left at Purdue. However, Neil did not return to college as planned. Why? War had broken out. The Korean War, a war that lasted 3 years. The war sent Neil Armstrong halfway across the globe. The Korean War. The Korean Peninsula juts out into the Pacific Ocean. North Korea has a communist government, while South Korea is a democracy. The war began in the 1950s after North Korea invaded South Korea. Right away, American troops went to South Korea's aid. Many other countries in the United Nations also joined the U.S.'s efforts. The Communist China and the USSR, however, sent soldiers to help North Korean forces. The fighting lasted for 3 years. Finally, the two sides agreed to a ceasefire in July of 1953. Today, as then, there is still North Korea and South Korea. In Korea, Neil Armstrong belonged to a fighter Squadron 15-1. He was one of the youngest pilots. The squadron flew small jets off a giant aircraft called the USS Essex. Neil's job was to bomb enemy bridges and railroad lines or scout areas where other planes would attack later on. To do this, Neil's plane had to fly very low and close to the ground. During the Korean War, Neil flew on 78 missions. It was dangerous and a stressful job, but Neil Armstrong never lost his cool. That's his Panther jet. On one mission, Neil was in his Panther jet plane making a low bombing run in a hilly area of Korea. Suddenly, his plane was hit by an enemy gunfire. Neil lost control as the aircraft took a nosedive, hurtling towards the ground. At 500 feet, part of the right wing was sheared off by a cable strung across the valley as a booby trap. Luckily, Neil regained control of the plane again and flew back to friendly territory. But the plane was too badly damaged to land. Neil had to bail out of the plane. His silk parachute billowed out and he landed safely in Rice Paddy. 2 days later, he was back aboard his aircraft carrier. Except for a cracked tailbone, Neil was unhurt. Almost 34,000 Americans were killed in the Korean War. But Neil Armstrong returned home with many medals. Now it was time to finish up college and receive his diploma.